Ever since Satya Nadella took over Microsoft in early 2014, Microsoft has become the king of acquisitions. They basically buy everything in sight in every sector you can think of, and they've only gotten more and more risk on with time. Mojang $2.5 billion, LinkedIn $26.2 billion, GitHub $7.5 billion, ZeniMax $7.5 billion, Nuance Communications $19.7 billion, and most recently Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion. And those are just the most notable acquisitions. Microsoft has completed dozens upon dozens of smaller acquisitions throughout the same time period. And let's not forget about their investments either. Just last year, Microsoft agreed to invest $10 billion into OpenAI. As you can see, Microsoft has committed well over $140 billion into investments and acquisitions over the past decade. For perspective, Meta has spent roughly $25 billion in acquisitions throughout the same time period. Google has spent $16 billion, Amazon has spent $30 billion, and Apple has only spent $6 billion. In other words, Microsoft has nearly spent more on acquisitions than all of their peers combined times 2. Their investments alone are literally enough to be a Fortune 100 company itself. Clearly a gutsy move, but this has often been described as being the smart play. I mean, it's not like their peers aren't investing similar amounts of capital, it's just that they don't invest as much into acquisitions when maybe they should be. For obvious reasons, buying highly established multi-decade billion-dollar companies is a lot safer than betting $100 billion on the metaverse. But is it really? Microsoft's acquisitions have obviously played out in their favor over the past decade, but that was during an everlasting bull market where everything tech-related was going up. During downturns, however, having clear focus on a few sectors and pinpoint precision over your subsidiaries is critical. And Microsoft's massive holdings is basically the exact opposite of that. So, will Microsoft's acquisition Galore eventually end up backfiring? Likely the best example of a company failing because it was too bloated is none other than GE. If you're not familiar with the GE, they were an industrial giant that was once the largest company in the world throughout much of the 2000s. It was created by Thomas Edison in 1892, and over the next century, they became involved in everything under the sun. From manufacturing kitchen appliances and household electronics to building jet engines and handing out loans. And this evolution was largely thanks to a man named Jack Welch, or Neutron Jack. Jack was a shrewd businessman that was basically the embodiment of all of the worst parts of capitalism. For example, he was the creator of the infamous rank and yank policy. This is when you fire the bottom 10% of your workforce every single year in order to consistently keep everyone on their feet and progressing. But while that might sound like a decent strategy on paper, it usually just leads to a bunch of infighting, backstabbing, and office politics instead of true forward progress. GE leveraged this strategy for a full 20 years between 1981 and 2001. This was one of the key strategies that got them to the top of the Fortune 500, and it wasn't until the 2010s that the effects of this practice really started to shine through. The reality was that GE's workforce had just become a soulless environment where people only looked out for themselves. As such, when the company started falling, most of their employees just jumped ship. And the ones that remained didn't really unite together, making the crash even more painful. And you know why this practice is especially relevant? Well, Microsoft leveraged the same strategy under Steve Ballmer's leadership between 2000 and 2014. And that was just the most notable example. Steve very much looked up to Jack Welch and tried to emulate his management style as much as possible, leading to ominously similar workforces and problems. For example, within the tech world, Microsoft has become somewhat of a dark horse ever since the 2000s. They've grown from hundreds of billions of dollars to trillions of dollars while scaling their workforce from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. But despite this insane growth, no one is particularly excited about Microsoft, other than Steve Ballmer of course, but let's just say he's biased. Seriously though, when was the last time that people were truly excited about a Microsoft product? Their partnership with ChatGPT was likely the highlight of their last 24 years of business. Conversely, Apple is able to reintroduce the iPhone 14 with a new name and garner 37 million views on YouTube alone. It's the same thing with even Google and Facebook. While these companies get loads of criticism, people still pay attention to them. Just recently, Threads was able to surpass 100 million downloads right after launch. With Microsoft, on the other hand, even people who are usually in the know often don't know that they own GitHub or LinkedIn. The only other tech giant whose workforce is similar in nature is Amazon, which is not surprising given that Jeff Bezos is also a fan of Jack Welch. In fact, Amazon still does rank and yanking to this day. But anyway, the bottom line is that whether it be consumers, employees, or even investors, dealings with Microsoft are largely just transactional. You could say that Microsoft is basically the definition of soulless corporation. This has been great for flying under the radar, minimizing press coverage and eating regulation. But this also brings into question how well the company can assemble and unite during a downturn. If GE was anything to go by, it's likely that Microsoft's employees, leadership, and investors would also just bail as soon as things got tough. In fact, they'd probably be praised by their friends and family and even the news for seeing the writing on the wall and jumping ship before it was too late. And to make things worse, soullessness is only the first similarity between Microsoft and GE. If we look behind the scenes, things get quite unsettling. There's hundreds and hundreds of articles and case studies out there about why GE failed, but I don't think any of them are as relevant as the case study written by Bill Gates himself. And honestly, his article is quite unnerving. I feel like you could go through the entire piece and replace every mention of GE with Microsoft, and it would fit perfectly. For example, Gates could have said, Microsoft's fall is not the result of innovators developing a better OS or cloud infrastructure. It's also not a case of outright fraud like Enron. It's a textbook case of mismanagement of an overly complex business. Only a few people saw it coming. I wish I could tell you that I was one of them, but I was just as surprised as most people. That's why I was eager to read Lights Out, Pride, Delusion, and the Fall of Microsoft. Goethe and Mann gave me the detailed insight I was looking for into the culture, decisions, and accounting that eventually caught up to Microsoft in a gigantic way. As you can see, GE didn't fall because of some sort of monumental event like fraud or being out-innovated or even the 2008 financial crisis. Instead, they slowly rotted from the inside out, something that no one really spotted until it was too late. But looking back, two red flags regarding GE's downfall become apparent in retrospect, starting with how GE's management team always made their numbers. Quarter after quarter and year after year, GE consistently posted increasing revenue and profit, just like Microsoft has since Satya took over. Growth in itself is not a bad thing, but such consistent growth can often be a red flag for more nefarious activities. Not necessarily illegal activities per se, but activities to ensure growth no matter the cost. GE, for example, would often sell assets to friends in order to boost quarterly profits. Bill Gates, of course, goes on to claim that Microsoft would never do anything to artificially boost profits, but I'm not sure that we can take him at his word. Last year, for example, Microsoft skipped salary increases despite high inflation due to quote-unquote economic uncertainties. Now, this would be completely understandable if Microsoft was at break-even or burning money. But Microsoft would actually go on to post record profits of $77 billion that same year. This means that the only reason that Microsoft didn't go through with salary increases was to make Wall Street happy. To meet the numbers no matter the cost and put on a success theater despite the economic headwinds, just like GE. Microsoft wants to be the company that performs no matter the situation, when in reality, that's simply not naturally possible, leading to some questionable choices. This brings us into Bill Gates' second takeaway about GE, which again can largely be applied to Microsoft. My second big takeaway from Lights Out is that Microsoft didn't have the right talent and systems to bundle together a dizzying array of unrelated businesses, including cloud infrastructure, social media, AI, tech hardware, gaming, video conferencing, and consumer software, and manage them well. Investors bought into the notion that the company's hands-off management style was better at managing things than anyone else, and that Microsoft could produce consistent profits even in highly cutthroat markets. And Microsoft successfully persuaded people that its empathetic leader, Satya, could avoid the pitfalls that had tripped up big conglomerates in the past. In reality, Satya often didn't understand the specifics of the industries they had to manage and couldn't navigate the trends in their industries. For example, the authors make the case that VP Phil Spencer didn't have a good handle on its huge gaming unit, Microsoft Gaming, which gambled tens of billions on acquisitions, sold money-losing consoles, and wasn't even close to Nintendo or Sony. Making money from Microsoft Gaming seemed shockingly simple to him at first, as they had already done it with Minecraft. But consistently satisfying a wide range of gamers was treacherously complex. And deep risks lurked there and were not always easily spotted in the quarterly profits and losses. One former Microsoft executive told the authors that Spencer struggled with basic concepts. The difference between the needs of console and mobile gamers, for instance, which was fundamental to leading an operation like Microsoft Gaming. This dynamic was not confined to Spencer, it was rampant throughout the company's top ranks. As a result, the ability of top executives to understand what was really going on was quite limited. The only people who could actually dig down into the numbers and see what was going on were in finance. And as I mentioned above, the finance people didn't have much incentive to bring negative news to Satya or Spencer. As you can see, the parallels between GE and Microsoft are stunning, which brings us into the question of, what does this all mean? As most of you probably know, we've mainly covered Microsoft from a positive light over the past year. And in the end, that is still the prevailing conclusion. Microsoft is still killing it, and though these shortfalls may eventually catch up with them, it's not exactly the greatest idea to bet on that, because you never know how long that could take to play out. After all, GE was on top for decades before they crumbled. So Microsoft could easily continue growing for another decade before cracks start to show. And in the investing world, the trend is always your friend, until it's not. But this does bring up the question of whether this is how Microsoft will eventually fade away. In the past, we've seen Microsoft overcome massive antitrust lawsuits, terrible consumer sentiment, and over a decade of stagnation. But maybe in the end, it will just be Microsoft's own raw weight that sinks them into the ground. Of course, the prevailing theory is that given Microsoft's hands-off management style, their subsidiaries are rather quick and nimble in their own right, thus making the entire company quick and nimble. But even if that is the case today and Satya truly is a superstar, will this always be the case with Microsoft? Will they always be one step ahead of the pitfalls of massive bloater corporations? Or has Microsoft just spent $141 billion on a ticking time bomb? Only time will tell. Over the next decade, Microsoft will not only have to step up to the plate in regards to management, but they'll also have to address the concern of market saturation just like all of their tech peers. Check out this video to learn more, but until then, I'm Harrer, and I'll see you guys on the next one.